writers create expectations in every story they make.
When dead men, and worse, come hunting for us in the night, do you think it matters who sits on the Iron Throne? No. Good.
Expectations about what the heroes will face.
In that darkness, the White Walkers came for the first time. They swept through cities and kingdoms.
About what matters and what doesn't.
Because Geo Mormont and Jon Snow both understood that the real war isn't between a few squabbling houses. It's between the living and the dead.
About what must be done to achieve the best possible outcome.
They fought together against their common enemy. Despite their differences, despite their suspicions. Together.
The writers on Game of Thrones wanted us to believe the White Walkers were fearsome enemies. If so, why did it take 92% of the story's runtime for the Walkers to become a direct threat to Westeros? The writers wanted us to believe that fighting the Walkers was the most important war. If so, why was the conflict for the Iron Throne and not the Walkers the focus of the last 3 episodes? The writers set very specific expectations for their story, only to undermine them throughout the show. Whether the writers did this on purpose or by accident, a breach of trust took place. And it's by exploring this breach that we'll find out exactly how Game of Thrones was ruined. We meet the Walkers in the very first sequence of the show, like the killer in a slasher movie, planting the idea that these are the antagonists. Their next big move against humans happens by the end of Season 2, and the next major offensive goes down in the final stretch of Season 5. There are 2 key problems here. One is the huge gap between plot beats. There are 20 episodes between the prologue and the assault on the Fist of the First Man, and 28 episodes between that and the attack on Harhome. That's only 3 demonstrations across 48 episodes that the Walkers are an aggressive foe. The second key problem is that all 3 plot beats I mentioned are pretty much the same, only more spectacular. The Walkers find people, send zombies after them, chase off the survivors, and then do nothing else to indicate they are an active danger to Westeros. What their actions indicate at best is that they don't want any living people on their side of the wall, but they don't seem hell-bent on invading Westeros or breaching the wall, which flies in the face of every statement the story has made about them. All of this is bad enough, but it gets worse in Season 3, when we learn that the White Walkers are vulnerable to damage from obsidian, aka dragonglass. It kills them on the spot. Season 5 tells us there is obsidian on Dragonstone, and by Season 7, the heroes are allowed to mine large quantities of it. Therefore, not only are the Walkers apparently disinterested in rampaging across Westeros, the story tells us that if they do, our heroes will have the special weapons needed to kill them, diminishing their threat level even further. To top it all off, the Walkers graduate to active threat in episode 67 out of 73, only to be dispatched 3 episodes later. There's no escaping the impression that the writers paid lip service to the idea of how formidable the Walkers are, but didn't actually make them formidable. To see it done right, let me bring up an obscure animated TV show from the 90s, Shadow Raiders. 4 warring factions have to set aside their long-standing differences to confront a powerful enemy determined to destroy them. The powerful enemy is the Beast Planet, a gargantuan construct that devours entire planets. The Beast deploys agents and warriors to inflict damage on potential targets, to soften them up for the final blow. nearly every episode of the first season features an attack from the Beast agents on one of the show's 4 factions, either by way of subterfuge or brute force, and their constant aggression sells them as a credible threat. Also, remember how I said the walkers became an active threat at 92% of the story's runtime? Well, the actual Beast planet becomes an active threat by the end of episode 13 out of 26, meaning 50% of the story's runtime, and it remains so for the duration of the show. Shadow Raiders gives its heroes and its audience no time to sleep on their main antagonist. The funny thing is that, despite having neutered and diminished the walkers in so many ways, the premise of many factions joining forces to defeat a common foe still had hope of being extremely fulfilling. Before I tell you why, I need to explain the concept of premise. I'll borrow the definition put forward by author Bill Johnson. A story premise sets out a story's core dramatic issue, the movement of that issue toward resolution, and the fulfillment that resolution sets up for the story's audience. If we apply that to Game of Thrones, we might get a premise like this. The White Walkers threaten to destroy all life, so the warring lords of the Seven Kingdoms must learn how to work together in order to fight the real menace. There are 2 ways of fulfilling this premise and satisfying the audience. One is to depict the White Walkers as a terrifying adversary and defeat them after costly battles. Because the writers didn't develop the Walkers this way, we are left with only one option: the moral satisfaction of watching the Seven Kingdoms put aside their differences in the name of the common good, of watching characters realize the error of their ways, of seeing them acknowledge that petty power struggles is a vicious circle that leads only to misery. In short, the audience can get fulfillment from the moral dimension of the show. However, this approach also ran into several issues. The first one is that despite nearly 7 seasons worth of squabbling, atrocities, indiscriminate murder, threats of the upcoming winter and what have you, Westeros doesn't look the worse for wear. There are always enough people to raise yet another army, enough resources to build fleets, enough food to keep the soldiers fed, and only token social unrest. And the much dreaded winter that starts in season 7 lasts only 3 episodes. Judging from all this evidence, it would seem that waging constant warfare is not such a costly and morally bankrupt affair after all. The second issue is that, even when the final stand against the Walkers occurs, out of the 7 kingdoms, only the North and the Vale take part. Apart from them, we have Daenerys, the Dothraki, and the Unsullied, most of them foreigners. Half of Westeros doesn't fight against the Walkers, so the idea of stopping petty infighting and coming together loses all credence. The third issue is that, after the Walkers are defeated, everybody focuses on the question of who's going to get the Iron Throne, meaning the Walkers were just a distraction, and the war that actually matters is the one for dominion over the 7 kingdoms.
We have won the Great War. Now we will win the last war.
So the few characters who did go through the gauntlet of fighting the Walkers did so with their attitudes unchanged. There is a fourth issue, and this is the one that really undercuts the premise's moral dimension. We've already seen clips of people saying the Iron Throne doesn't matter. The important thing is the danger the White Walkers represent, and that's where the character's attention should be focused. For most of the show, the Walkers are only a potential threat, since they don't seem to have a plan that would allow them to invade Westeros. That changes only after they resurrect the dragon Viserion and use him to bring down a portion of the wall that keeps them off Westeros. The problem is that the only reason they even got their hands on a dragon is that the heroes went beyond the wall on a mission to prove the Walkers and their undead slaves are real. They did this in order to convince Cersei and Euron they must give up squabbling and band together to face the real threat. So, it's very likely that if Jon Snow hadn't been dead set on convincing these people, that dragon never would have been within reach of the Walkers. and they probably would have stayed behind the wall, never attacking Westeros. In other words, by caring so much about making sure everybody confronted the potential threat of the walkers, by taking action to do so, our heroes ended up causing the invasion. I don't know if this was an intentional ironic touch or just a blunder the writers fell into because they were just so in love with the idea. Regardless, it completely undermines the moral foundation of the story, robbing it of all thematic credibility. It indirectly says that the characters should have kept on fighting one another, bickering over birthrights, borders, and whatnot, and that way, the supernatural threat would have stayed on their side of the wall and bothered no one. So, after going through all this, what is it that ruined Game of Thrones? Well, there isn't the visceral satisfaction of watching our heroes defeat a brutal adversary that's been aggressively pursuing them for so long, and there's no moral satisfaction of seeing characters, and maybe even entire societies, learn from their mistakes and forge a better future. The writers primed their audience for a certain kind of fulfillment, and then decided to toss that out the window and focus on providing spectacle and the semblance of thematic substance. That's what ruined Game of Thrones. It wasn't the only thing that went wrong, but it was the most important. Given all this, it might seem it was a bad idea to trust the writers of this show, but the truth is not that simple. David Benioff and Dan Weiss did also prime the audience to expect terrific spectacle, earth-shattering plot twists, and their favorite characters acting like 80s action heroes, looking cool and spouting quotable one-liners.
Nothing's worth anything to dead men.
If you jump on the Game of Thrones bandwagon for the spectacle, the thrills and chills, and that tantalizing feel of being on a roller coaster ride, then Benioff and Weiss deliver on their promises from beginning to end, and you're probably not sorry to have trusted them. But what if you trusted them to deliver a fantastic story that respected the complex moral dimensions of the source material? What if you trusted them based on the amazing storytelling of the first 4 seasons? Well, in that case, you were actually trusting George R.R. Martin. Benioff and Weiss were responsible for bringing Martin's story to life on the screen, and they did a fine job of it. But the thematic and moral substance came primarily from Martin. And when Benioff and Weiss had to blaze their own trail, they concentrated on delivering grand spectacle, not a tale of outstanding thematic value. Plus, there were clues in the early years that Benioff and Weiss were inclined for a somewhat simplified approach to storytelling. We can see it in their adaptation of Stannis Baratheon, who is a more complex figure in the books, also in how Tyrion Lannister is divested of many disturbing traits so the show can make him a more colorful, audience-friendly character. To sum it all up, should we have trusted these writers? If you care primarily about spectacle and pure entertainment, then yes. If you wanted something more substantial and morally compelling, then no. Telling a story is like any other act of communication. It demands trust between the communicator and the recipient. Trust too little and we don't enjoy any stories. Trust too much and we go on ignoring red flags all the way to the finish line. A more balanced approach requires that we hold storytellers to high standards, like we would any other talented professional. To achieve that, we need to trust that the writers are doing their best work, that their stories are living up to the expectations they primed us for, and that those expectations are not contradictory. The only way to get there is by ensuring audiences understand the subtle techniques that go into creating great stories. It's not about putting down a writer's effort or dwelling on negativity, but about making sure the stories that come out are in their best possible form. It benefits writers because they are compelled to grow in their craft without settling for lazy approaches or half-assed work. And audiences get to enjoy stories that are emotionally engaging, intellectually enriching, and assembled with the care that reflects the skill of a professional artist. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, why not go ahead and subscribe to the channel. You can also help me out by sharing the video, giving it a like, pitching in via Patreon, or just by dropping a comment. Hope to see you in a future video.